Sergio Troncoso. I am so honored to be here talking with you and learning from you today. It's a seriously pleasure and an honor. I had The Last Tortilla and Other Stories was one of the books that I've, had. It's right here actually,
and thank you, Frederick, for inviting me to your program. And by the way, that was 7 books ago. So
I know. You are so prolific. It's unbelievable. You have had quite a remarkable journey as well, from El Paso, and of course, I spent time in the neighborhood where you grew up when I was myself out there researching my biography of Arturo Islas. And I know where where you've come from and where you've been and where you're making these huge radical changes in the world. Interventions is the feature that I have with the American Book Review. And so as we kind of launch here, I just want to ask you how you might see your work on all of these different levels, both your essay work, your fiction writing, but also your outreach, your work with the TIL and so many other aspects, the Troncoso reading prizes, how you intervene or see this intervening intellectually, creatively, politically, and obviously, or maybe not so obviously, maybe they do different work in this space.
Well, I'll tell you, I think my work intervenes in a very specific way, which is I've always wanted to show the Mexican-American writer as a thinker in the mode of people like Kafka or Sartre, Dostoevsky, to be taken seriously as a mind and to combine philosophy and literature. When I wrote The Last Tortilla, you have, which is a book I wrote published in 1999, the very first story I wrote, The Abuelita, was about this Chicano from Yale calling his Mexican grandmother and arguing about Heidegger's being towards death. And of course, people are saying, what the hell are you doing? You're combining serious philosophical discussions with the border. And so for me, it's not just the Mexican-American writer as thinker, but also a thinker about the working class, about poverty, because that's how I grew up. And so often academics and I certainly spent a lot of time at places like Harvard and Yale, they just assume poor people don't think. They assume poor people don't know or don't discuss very important issues of God and death and what is the meaning of life. Who are we? And they do. They're just ignored. And of course, that's what I wanted to change, to intervene, to break open, not just Mexican-American literature in terms of having a writer who is seriously interested in philosophy. I was going to be a philosopher. I was sent in my dissertation prospectus on Aristotle. I spent many years, I learned German, but I did not want to separate myself from my community. And so the deeper I got into philosophy, of course, the further away I got away from where I grew up, which was El Paso and Isleta, and carrying live chickens from trucks, which was my first job. And so for me, my work to intervene was to bridge these worlds, the philosophical world of serious intellectual, psychological questions, philosophical questions, with the characters on the border, from the border, who are discussing and dealing with these issues, and put this sort of serious thinking literature or philosophy and literature into American literature. And so that if you were to ask me, how did I intervene? That's how I intervened. Someone like Juan Felipe Herrera, who's become a friend, and he's such a great, fantastic writer. He said, well, you're our Wittgenstein. And I think he understands what I have done, which is very different from almost, any Chicano writer or Latino writer, seriously. I mean, there are some who are interested in philosophy, but for me, from the very first story to the last book I've written, A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, it is all informed philosophically. And some of it is obvious, and some of it is subtle. And I expect the reader, intelligent reader like you, Frederick, to tease out the philosophy. And I'm happy to talk about it, but I think it's just like somebody from like Kafka, like in Metamorphosis, or Dostoevsky, some of my favorite writers, they used literature to really explore ideas. And I'm doing the same thing, but within the Chicano context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, it's a beautiful way also of responding to another question that I had about some of the themes that recur in your work. The borderlands, self-discovery, our intergenerational conflicts, heritage, but also love, joy, pain, sorrow. But that question was really about how you as an author, as a creator, make new this experience. And in many ways, you've just kind of got at that. You make new by this kind of this deep infusion, whether we feel it directly or indirectly, of the kind of metaphysical, the kinds of deep questionings that inform you and your person.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up on like, that I bring myself into some of my work, because it all began, and gets to a very interesting question in my mind about audience. It began with my reading Nietzsche. One of the things Nietzsche said is that if you dig deep enough into yourself, you will get into the main issue, the main problem, psychological, philosophical, that everyone faces. So you are your own best experiment in a way. And so the question is, if you're digging honestly into yourself, you're also looking at the problems and issues that you have as a person. Now, the interesting thing is when sometimes people read my work, they might say, well, he's only writing about himself. And I find that funny, because I'm not. I'm actually writing about, I hope, the human condition, but I'm using myself as a vehicle. And the question is this, I think this would be a sort of a fascinating question. Because when you see yourself as a vehicle for exploration, literary exploration, when will audiences, especially white audiences, see you, the protagonist, or the person that is the touchstone for the literary imagination that you're using in your work, as relating to them, right? As a stand-in for every man or every woman, because you can write great, and this is I get this comment all the time, but this gets to this question of, when will white audiences give you a chance? Is that when you read Kafka or when you read Dostoevsky, you assume, oh, that's going to relate to me because they're great thinkers, they're great writers. And so repeatedly, I get from white audiences, let's say not from the border or from the Rio Grande, they said, oh my God, I read this story from you and it struck me so hard. But yet they would never have encountered this story because, I'm writing about a Chicano on the border in El Paso carrying chickens, but it's about really a deep question of psychology that I'm exploring in the story. And so I find many white audiences don't give you a chance as a thinker. They assume, he's only writing about his community. He's only writing about himself. And that is true, but it's not the only truth in what I'm doing. In fact, if I'm doing it right, I'm really writing in the same vein as somebody like a Sartre would be, which was to get at questions that affect all of us, but you're using yourself as a vehicle to do this. And so the main issue is actually external to you as a writer. Like, people don't often give you a chance because they assume, some Chicano's not going to be able to think. He's not really going to understand German philosophy or give them a chance to say, he might teach me something about my psychology, my psyche, because I'm going to pigeonhole him and say he only talks about his community and he's, rah-rahing his own experience. And I think that always stops people from encountering you, the empathy that you need from the reader to give you a chance as a writer. And so I think this is a very important question that we all face, because we're all always trying to broaden this audience, whoever we are, in terms of Latinx literature, to get taken seriously as American literature.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. It does. It also nicely leads to a couple of other sort of further questions. One is, really, why, the essay becomes important for you, and how it, also, works within the kind of space outside of yourself. And then the kind of follow-up, of course, is, from what you've just said, does it, you have a track record of publishing with academic presses until, of course, this last run of books with Cinco Punto. Is that also a part of that somehow those presses were more open and less functioning as gatekeepers to precisely what you were talking about? But maybe let's start with the essay, maybe, or wherever you want to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love the personal essay because, again, I can do this sort of internal exploration of my own, let's say, a fight I had with my father in one of the essays I have in Crossing Borders, that gets into generational conflicts, that gets into, breaking away, but also creating yourself. And so all of these questions affect everyone beyond, Chicano on the border or in El Paso. But to be able to attract readers, to give them that tactile sense, you start with the essay of, I had a fight with my father. And everybody understands that. Or, because often children have fights with their own parents of trying to break away. But then as I tease them with this particular image of who my father was and what the fight started with, and then how it went into something much deeper between us and between myself, I hope to kind of drag the reader into these philosophical, psychological discussions. So for me, it is sort of an artifice in a way to start personal, but take it philosophical. It's like attracting somebody. You're attracting somebody with an image of, everyone will understand this, a fight with your father, but then surprise them with what happens at the end of the essay with, this is where we're going. And we started with this that is very easy to understand, and then take them to something that is very complex to understand. So it is, in a way, going from, in a way, also simplicity to complexity. And so that's why I love the personal essay, because it's, I take it from people like Voltaire and many others who, who really were using the essay, and others whom I love, that took the essay as an exploration into yourself, and if that exploration is honest, it reaches everyone else, even though it's really about yourself. And so the question is, did I succeed? And I write about what matters to me. When my wife had breast cancer, in fact, Luis Urea teaches this essay, Letter to My Young Sons, and he said he loves teaching this essay. And in fact, next week, Lorraine Lopez, I don't know if you know her. Lorraine is using my Crossing Borders personal essays for her essay class, because they're very emotional essays about my wife's battle against breast cancer. But then it's, what do you learn when you face that death? And you overcome it, of course. But what do you learn about yourself, about what really matters to you, about the body of the person next to you, because they're going to be affected by what happens with their disease, and how you're going to relate to them.
Sergio, I'm reminded just briefly of Montaigne's his statement, "I am myself the matter of my work," right? And of course, he's a
Exactly.
famous essayist.
Oh, he's a great essayist. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, so tell me about this, publishing space, because as you and I both know and have both encountered firsthand, there's still, a lot of gatekeeping that goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's hard. I mean, I think, in all honesty, I started with academic presses like the University of Arizona Press, in part because I didn't know any better. Way back when, when I started writing and I started publishing, I just approached the press that had published other people that I liked. And I was not savvy. I was not, and we can get into I was not an MFA guy connected to all the New York presses and all of this stuff. Um, and so I just went with who would take my work. And then later, when I had the choice to do either academic or more commercial presses, I'm muy terco. Put that in your interview. I don't give a crap about money. Um, my books sell tens of thousands of copies, but I will not compromise my work for commercial success. Because for me, really, I am still a guy who loves philosophy and literature. I want to say it the way I want to write it. And if a New York press or a commercial press loves it, so be it. But if they don't, I'm not going to change it. And so for me, it began almost as a mistake to publish with academic presses. They simply were the ones I knew and had a few books of, and sent them, and they took my work. But then, as I got older, and I had the opportunity, and I have stories of being approached by the Big Five, and I remember an interview with an editor, and I won't mention who it was, but I said, Sergio, why don't you write a novel about the sexcapades of a Chicano arriving in the Ivy League, and the series of sexcapades he's going to have to find who he is. And that was their pitch to me. And so, right, of course, you're nodding your head and you're saying that was the same response. That's not what I do. What the hell are you thinking? For me, the dollars, because the other thing, I'll put that aside. The other thing people don't know is I'm actually a great investor. I'm actually really good at math. And so I've set my life so I can do whatever the fuck I want. Somebody dangling a little money in New York, I make that every other month. So, and that's one of the pieces. I know you had asked some questions. What's some of the advice you would give to future writers? Set your life up so that what matters is your art and your work, and that you will not compromise your art and your work, whether the money is dangled or it is not. Because what matters is that story that you want to write, that is what you want to say and how you want to say it. And even if it breaks stereotypes, and even if people don't understand it, you should still do it. And so I've set up my life so that I can do that, exactly that. So if a commercial publisher wants to do it my way, wonderful. And if they don't want to do it, I walk. Warren Buffett, I take his advice very seriously. The most powerful position to be in is the position to walk away. And in every contract negotiation, I am in that position. I can walk away and I don't give a crap. I'll find someone else to publish it. So that's a long answer to trying to tell you why I started with academic presses. But for me, it's the work that matters, and the integrity of the art that you're creating on the page. Mm-hmm. Do not compromise it when the money is dangled in front of you, because it will be.
Yeah, and speaking of philosophers on this topic, not exactly, of course, Hegel and Warren Buffett, I'm not sure what they would do in a room together, but it takes me to that, the master-slave dialectic. But being in a position where you are able to say no,
Right.
Right. So yeah, let's, there's a couple of things here that I kind of wanted to, you've got books coming out of your ears. I know you work really hard. It's not like this is magic or anything, but very different kinds of projects that are coming out now and right around the corner. Why don't we talk first about Nobody's Pilgrim? And, it's interesting that I made the initial kind of the impulsive mistake here that it was a YA novel just because it was teen protagonists. And of course, you and I both know, from our constant reading that, my goodness, there are teen protagonists, peppered, scattered all over world literature that are not, say, YA. So interesting that I would make that assumption. But why don't we talk about, Nobody's Pilgrim and the journey and any surprising parts of that
Mm-hmm.
kind of process?
Well, the first thing to think about in Nobody's Pilgrims is it's an adventure novel. It's a novel about these three teens, Turi, Arnulfo, who are from El Paso. Arnulfo is an undocumented immigrant, and Turi is a Chicano who lives in El Paso. And they meet at a chicken farm. They both are working there. And then Molly is that third person. She's a working class white that they actually meet on the road after they steal a truck and meet in rural Missouri. So, and they're all 17 or 17 and three quarters, so to speak. And so it's a novel about, it's a dystopian novel about the youth being, I get very, my kids are my inspiration in many ways. I have a 23-year-old son and a 26-year-old son. And I think we're facing a lot of issues in this country, as you know, with politically, culturally, anti-immigrant, anti-Latino, and just kind of violence. People just not giving other people a chance. And so I created this novel about these teens escaping the border and escaping violence and still being pursued across the country, in which people want to harm them. And it's in a society, in sort of a United States, that is collapsing. And the most interesting thing is, and you'll see it if you read it, it involves a virus. And I wrote it, finished the last draft the year before COVID was ever in the news, literally. So, and it's a different kind of virus. It's Marburg B, which is based on a real virus from Marburg, that is not transmissible through the air, but it's really through bodily fluids. But it's much more vicious. It has an 80% kill rate. So this society is collapsing around them, and these teens are facing trial after trial as they go across the country to a dreamland that they think about, following really Turi's idea of Connecticut. He has this idea that Connecticut, he had read it in the library, beautiful bucolic scenes and fall in Connecticut. And that's where he wants to go. He wants to escape the border. So it's about this society collapsing around these teens and how their resiliency and toughness see them through. So it's an adventure novel and a dystopian novel, centered around a lot of border themes, but also the border in the United States as they go deep in, these immigrants, so to speak, go deep into the United States and what they are facing as this society is somewhat collapsing around them.
Was there ever a moment, Sergio, when you lost your way maybe in the narrative, or where it took a surprising turn for you?
Oh, yes, all the time. I guess, for me, and I've said this often, when I dream in my characters, I really get deep into every character that I write. And there's a certain point when I'm deep into a novel that's almost constantly happening every night. And I'm dreaming about things that are happening to them. And I always thought it was very odd for people to say, oh, you're an author, as if you're some sort of puppeteer like a marionette, controlling what they do. And it's actually the opposite. My characters would take me where they want to go. And I am just a vehicle to put it down on paper. And so this sense of authorship of, you doing it to them, it's not that. For me, when my characters come alive, they're taking me where they want to go and where the story demands. So there were a lot of moments in which, and I don't want to sort of do spoiler alerts, but there are deaths in the novel. There is, there's some difficult things that happen, but I think it's also very realistic, and it true to the story that I was trying to say, to convey about the resiliency and toughness, but also the tragedy of being young in a society that is somewhat collapsing.
Really powerful. Yeah. And I do look forward to it. I, of course, I don't have any galleys on this, but I'll
send you some galleys.
That'd be amazing. Yeah. So
and you can tell me what you think.
I would love that, with big honor. You have a peculiar kind of immigrant, Nepantla, Familias, Nobody's Pilgrim. These are all, hot off the press, but you've a long history. We open with talking about Las Tortilla. You have a long history of publishing, deep history of publishing. How would you, if you were to take a step back as president, say, of Texas Institute of Letters now, and you came across the work of Troncoso, how would you characterize this journey of this work, this sort of?
Well, I would say, yeah. I would say that I was born an outsider in this country, and an outsider even within my community. And what I mean by that is, in El Paso, the poor people and the rich people and everything in between are Mexicano. They're all Mexicano. 80% and that's been true for at least 100 years. So first, I think I was an outsider because literally we had an outhouse in the backyard. We were poor Mexicanos that were made fun of by the rich Mexicans in El Paso and Juarez. And then when I went to Harvard, I was an outsider because I didn't even know what the Ivy League was. And I didn't know what any of that was. So I think, and then after a certain point, I became an outsider on purpose, because what I would see in American society, whether it was at Harvard or Yale or New York City or Boston or many of these places that I lived, I wanted to comment on and change. I wanted to not just drink the Kool-Aid of waving the American flag and saying that's being patriotic. So if I were to characterize my own work, I would say that he was born an outsider, but at a certain point when he could have been an insider, and a lot of people say, well, you went to Harvard, you went to Yale, and you teach at Yale, you're now sort of an insider. But for me, I'm always, I don't want to say a bomb thrower, but I want to change things. I don't trust authority. When somebody actually says, oh, you're doing great, I feel like I need to question more about what I am doing rather than question it less or just assume the accolades. So for me, I think that's how I would characterize my work. And it's the same thing, writing philosophy and literature. It's not necessarily commercial. If I were to want to be, HarperCollins 8 books in, I would not be writing this. I would be writing some much more schlocky stuff. I mean, I don't want to criticize some writers, who sell a lot of work, but frankly, for me, they're sort of lightweight thinkers. Not even thinking really. It's really sort of just a ride and fun, and that's okay. People need that too. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what I do. At a certain point, I was an outsider. Not by choice, but then, I'm happy to be outside the community pointing these things out, pointing the misogyny, that sometimes happens in our community, or the homophobia. And I don't really care if people get pissed off at me. I'm actually happy. I'm very pugilistic. Si me picas, te pico.
I'm glad I'm on your team.
You mess with me, I'm gonna mess with you.
Yeah.
And it's very simple. And so for me, and this is, by the way, this is Isleta as much as it is Harvard and Yale. As a powerful academic, that you don't get respect by being a wallflower. You get respect by pushing back in the right way with intelligence and focus. And so I learned this way back when, and applied it, and just really translated the immigrant values that my parents showed me into the Ivy League. So that's how I would characterize my work, as a writer who is owned only by himself, and that's it. And even then, I am, I hope, self-critical enough to dig into my own foibles and mistakes and problems.
In the edited volume, Nepantla, Familias, was this something, was this a kind of in the back of your mind, this idea of a kind of this outsiderness to what we create, who we are, a purposeful outsiderness in your selection of the pieces? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, I came, Gloria Anzaldúa has been very important to me in my life, philosophically, and she was a Chicana who was a great thinker, and so I got this opportunity from the Wycliffe Collections and Texas A&M Press, and they gave me carte blanche. They said, "We want you to create a Mexican American anthology of whatever you want." And for me, this issue of Nepantla and Nepantla Familias, the living in between languages, between cultures, between geographies, was not only, and you'll see it in my essay, but in many other essays, the fabric of my life, that I would spend and give a talk at Yale, and then in a day I would be visiting my mother in her adobe house that we built in Isleta. And then we would switch from Spanish to English, and then I would see my brothers who live in another part of El Paso and are now have done well. And so I would be crossing economic, geographic, cultural borders literally in 1 week. That so very different from and I had to get used to it. This sort of expansive, malleable identity of being able to talk to people at Yale at the same time as talk to my mother and talk to my brothers and talk to, people who were working on the farm not far from our house. And so I wanted to really delve deep into this idea of Nepantla, of living in between psychologically, culturally, identity. And so I sent out notices to the writers I love. And I know a lot of them. And I was really picky. I have to tell you, I was very picky. And some of these writers sent me several things that I rejected, and several things and some things that I accepted. And I wanted the best work. And I think the reason I got such great writing and great authors is because people trust me. I don't have any agenda. My agenda is great work on the page. And for me, that could mean many different things. I love experimental work. I love traditional work, but it has to be great characterization and great work on the page. And so I think a lot of these writers, and I also told them, I don't want old work. I want something that no one's ever read before, something that's not published. So of the 30 works that are published in Nepantla Familia, 25 have never been published before. So it's mostly, and the other 5 have only been published in the last year or two in literary presses. So it's mostly work that is not available anywhere. And I also believed that this issue of whether you want to call it identity or you want to call it of negotiation or really just raw conflict of living in between different borders, psychological, linguistic, happens within families. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where you reject or accept what your parents are giving you in terms of their cultural traits. That's where you reject or accept your language. That's where, where people might see you as a traitor, or people might see you as carrying forward the heritages of your parents, or a mix, of course, which is what all of us are doing. We're picking and choosing. This I like from my father, but no, I did not like his machismo, etc. And so I wanted to do this anthology of Nepantla Familias. And by the way, the title I chose very carefully because it has Nahuatl, it has Spanish, and it has English. It is literally the borders that we're all crossing every day. And so that was sort of my my creation, and these writers, and there's some fantastic writing in there. Some of the ones that I love, David Dorado Romo. His I put first because it was a great essay on this concept of Nepantla, and his going in between religions, going in between really understanding Nepantla and the root of the Nahuatl in Nepantla, and even going to Israel. So his essay was very sort of seminal, and I love his work because, again, he's a great writer that does not necessarily toe the line of commercialism. He toes the line of doing great work, and that's what I care about. Another writer that I really love in Nepantla Familia, I mean, all of them are my favorite, honestly. Irene Lara Silva, who wrote a great story called Border as Womb, Emptied of Night and Swallows. And so she's switching narrators of a man pursuing a Chicana to the border. And it also has this sort of almost temporal flux and almost dreamlike quality that unsettles the reader of where are you? Who are you? Where do you belong? And it's coming from somebody, from an Anglo who's chasing a Chicana to the border. And so the experimentation I loved. The switching of the gender protagonist I loved. And so all of these writers in many ways are doing, and I told them that's what I want. I want something new that people have never read before on this issue of Nepantla. And thankfully they, the other thing is I'm a writer's writer. So not only did I get them good money, they all got good money for their work. I also required the publisher to only take first North American serial rights, so that these writers, once they publish it, they can republish it and they own the rest of the rights. Because I look out for writers. I'm a writer's writer, and so now each of these works can be republished and they can get more money and do it in their anthologies or in their own work. And I made it a point of the press to do this because I'm looking out for writers. I wanted to create an anthology in which the editor was as much pushing me artistically, but also looking out for me commercially and professionally. And so for me, that's the kind of editor that I would love to have.
Beautiful, Sergio, and your work is so incredible. I can't wait to read the pieces and to assign them. Of course, you are also throwing open all the doors and the windows to the Texas Institute of Letters as president. And, again, bringing this writer, deep sort of impulse to that space. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on there and where you see the TIL in the future?
Well, the Texas Institute of Letters is really a great organization that's been around since 1936, and it was formed, with the luminaries like over time, like Larry McMurtry and Cormac McCarthy and a lot of these writers that were sort of the traditional Texas writers. And at a certain point, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, it was, I think, too white and too male. And so a lot of the people on the board that came on and that were brought on to really change the organization to really have it reflect the rest of Texas, to honor more women in lifetime achievement that should have been honored many years ago. So of the board, and this is, Carmen Tafoya preceded me, and then before that was Steve Davis, and before that was Kip Stratton. And I think Kip Stratton was really the one who began it all in many ways. We honored, I think, 4 women in a row, everybody from Pat Mora, Sandra Cisneros, Sarah Bird, all in a row. And then we just honored John Recchi last year for his great seminal work, which I've always loved, City of Night. And then this year we're honoring, and all of this is public, Benjamin Lire Sainz, a great writer from El Paso. And we've made it a point of inducting the most Chicanas and Chicanos, people like Tim Hernandez, Daniel Chacon, Sasha Pimentel, etc. And then other writers that were constantly, we just inducted Cristina Rivera Garza, the Mexican writer who teaches in Houston, who won a MacArthur. We also are inducted the most, or the last, say, 5-7 years, the most African-American writers. We just inducted Brian Washington from Houston as well. And so, we are on a mission to have the TIL, the new TIL, represent all of Texas. That's what I care, the best writing, period. And I think, it's high time that we did that. And I think it really does matter because in Texas right now, and this happened probably about 5 years ago, the majority of grade school kids and high school kids are Mexicanos, Latinos. Did you know that? In all of Texas, the majority of kids in high school and grade school are now Latino in Texas. And so that is the future. So if we are not honoring and focusing on writers from that community, we're going to lose our readers. We're going to lose the future. And so, people like Javier Garza, David Bowles, and there are a lot of them. Carmen Tafoya writes a lot of children's works. There are a whole bunch. Natalia Sylvester, another great. Another one I really love is Lupe Mendez. We just honored them with our award. So as president, I get to appoint all 12 judging committees, and I appoint all the chairs of each judging committee, from best novel, best poetry, best short story, etc. And I make sure that they are all, very well represented. Chicano writers on these committees, and a lot of them are running these committees, and also, great Anglo writers, great, African American writers. I want to appoint the best writers to make choices about what is seen as the standard in terms of great literature, but I want it to reflect that standard today. And so all of this has taken a lot of fights, and sometimes not a lot of fights, because frankly, it was more of a velvet revolution in the TIL. People recognized that unless this organization changed, it would die. And I have to say that many of these old writers that represented sort of the TIL 20 years ago recognized that and understood that and brought us in for that purpose. Mm. So it wasn't really a fight. It was really more of, it's time, it's your turn. You take the helm, and we're receiving more money than ever, more interest than ever. For example, in this last award cycle, in which we are giving 12 different awards, we received the most entries we've ever received for our awards. Mm. And we've kept records for 4 years. This was the high. And these awards just ended. The deadline was January 4th, and they'll be announced in March. I already know 2 of them, but I can't tell you until all the 12 awards are done. But people notice this organization has changed, and it's making an effort to represent all of Texas. And I think that all of us on the board now are on that same trajectory, because it matters. It matters when you're this young Chicano on the border who loves to read, and you're a gordito like I was who loves to sit and read in the library, and then you start writing stories. It's like, are you reflected in what's being lauded in Austin, in Dallas, in Houston, in El Paso? Are you not excluding the writers from McAllen, from El Paso, from poor areas that have great talent? And are we reflecting that? And so I think all of us in the TIL now are on that same mission. But you have to be, you cannot shirk away from these responsibilities. One thing that really bothers me is that there are a lot of Chicano, Latino writers. I won't name them, but once you made it, you don't reach back and help the next generation. And you have to do that. You have to do that. And you don't get any benefit from it. In fact, it's taking time away from my work, to do all this organizational work, but it will reflect the new generation better. And you're helping someone else with you're not, it's not really glorious to be president of the TIL. It's mostly work. It's about 30, 40 hours of work a week. But if you want the canon changed for the future, that's what you have to do. You have to sacrifice a little bit of your time to help the next generation and to reform these organizations. And I think every single year we have new inductees, and I'm always encouraging other writers, some of them whom I've inducted myself, to nominate new TIL members. But it's up to them. I am even as president, every TIL member is only limited to 2 nominations, and you have to create a dossier. You have to create an entire package to nominate somebody, and all of this takes time. And you're doing it for somebody else, but not enough of us are doing things like that, where you're sacrificing your time to help somebody else move up the ranks. And I think we need to do this as a community.
Sergio,
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're doing that work and have been doing that work. It's, just part of who you are. Tell me.
Yo no me dejo. In Spanish, I don't take shit from anybody. No, because that's how you get to these places, because you fight, and you can also talk in a nice and intellectual way, so that people understand, but you do not back up. And so you don't necessarily use the words, shit or whatever, but you're doing it the same, to prove a point and to achieve what you need to achieve. It's crossing borders again.
This, no taking shit and, making sure to throw open the doors, there. And you mentioned earlier Juan Felipe Herrera, and I started thinking about MFA programs and the Iowa workshop and its kind of infamy for really being a white only space. As someone, again, you've mentioned a kind of self-chosen outsider in many ways. How do you see these programs? I mean, in a way, you're teaching at Yale. You are also opening doors for new generations of Latinx, Latina writers, Chicanx. And yet, these MFA programs exist, and they seem to be, I don't know, somehow important. But yeah, maybe from your side of the table, you can share your insights.
Well, first, there are great MFA programs, but we have some in Texas right now, and so of course Iowa and some of these others have always been traditionally the seen as some of the best, and they have produced some great writers, and we have some writers from the TIL, like Oscar Cázares, for example, that went to Iowa. So if I were smarter and younger when I was younger, and even knew what an MFA program was, I probably would have done an MFA. But I didn't know any better, and no one told me, and of course, and so that's in my mind why I never really did an MFA. But then after a while, after I started writing and my stuff started getting published, I said I need to teach myself So I started finding out what they teach at MFA programs and then teaching it to me, but I didn't have a degree to hang on. But I think, for younger writers, if you really want to write, you can find great MFA programs that also push ahead and develop great Latino writers. I mean, the UTEP MFA program, for example, is a fantastic MFA program that's also bilingual, by the way, that you can get an MFA in writing in Spanish. And the University of Houston, for example, where Cristina Rivera Garza, who just won a MacArthur, is head of the Spanish PhD program and MFA program in Spanish, but also great writers in English. And I think if you're a good MFA program like in Iowa, you have to recognize that unless you're opening the doors wide and aggressively recruiting this Latino talent, which you could see in Nepantla Familias, people who are now reviewing it said, "Oh my God, these writers are terrific, and you have so many of them." If you do not see that talent and what that talent represents in terms of the future, you have to, as an MFA director in Iowa or wherever you are, or USC, you have to start going after this Latino talent. And so you see the writing on the wall that if you stay too white, if you stay too cerrado, too closed, you're going to be missing out. You're going to be losing, to great programs who are opening their doors to this talent. Like in Houston or UTEP or USC or UCLA. And so I hear this question all the time, and I'm asked this question all the time. UC Riverside has a great program. I think that is with Alex Espinosa and other people there, that is open and interested in great writing talent from the Latino community. So I think, if you were to ask me the issue between MFA and non-MFA, I think one of the things that not being an MFA graduate is that I was not taught a cookie cutter approach. I was not taught this is how you build a story, this is how you get. So in a way, it sort of handicapped me to, let's say, New York publishers at the beginning. But on the other hand, it preserved probably an authenticity in my voice that never really was stamped out. So I think you gain and you lose. You gain in terms of connections. You gain in terms of not making stupid mistakes, in terms of your writing by going to an MFA program. But you also are probably going to lose some of your voice by going to an MFA program. So it just depends on the individual writer, what they need at what point. I know, and some of these people who appeared in Nepantla Familias, I won't mention the names, but who, for example, went to Columbia MFA programs, Columbia being another great one, way back when, and they were kind of humiliated and crushed in these MFA programs, and because they were writing things that were from the Latinx community. And over there at Columbia, they weren't being understood and they were being ignored. And it took them years after finishing the Columbia MFA program to feel whole again, to feel that they were a worthy writer before they started writing again. So the wrong kind of MFA program, and I'm not saying Columbia is like that anymore. It was way back when this writer went, can crush your soul, can really crush you. And instead of helping you as a writer, can really tell you don't deserve to be a writer. You don't deserve to be. Instead of and I have this issue with any student I have, that you have to sort of nurture a student along to get them to develop, and it's all about hard work. But there are some writing programs that are still stuck in the past, and so I think it's all about choosing the right program with the right teachers and with the right attitude. And that waxes and wanes every year, depending on who's where, and what they're doing and what kind of writers they're trying to attract. But I have heard MFA horror stories.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I've heard people who have done MFAs and catapulted to the top. and who were Chicano. So I think it can be very helpful and sometimes can be very hurtful.
As we wind this down, just a couple of questions. One is, new generation or older, or even very past. Is there a writer, and Latinx or otherwise, that you find yourself going back to again and again because it's just the gift that keeps on giving?
Well, I mean, I love Benjamin Sainz. I think Benjamin is a wonderful writer, and I love how he has tried many different things. I think I also love Rigoberto Gonzalez. He's a friend of mine, and I think he's also a thinker in many ways in terms of writing. But there are a lot of newer writers. Vanessa Villarreal, I think, is a fantastic writer, and I've read her work, and I've reviewed her work for the Dallas Morning News, and I loved it. Also, Rosa Alcalá from UTEP. Just people doing different things, opening the minds of what Latinx could be. And I think that's where we're going. We're going into experimentation, into variety, into people challenging norms, even the old norms within Latinx, of whatever that has meant. And so for me, those are the people who open up my eyes. Lupe Mendez is also great. I really love his poetry. And by the way, I know you asked me that, but I've never written a poem in my life, but I love reading poetry. So probably the next thing after fiction that I read is poetry, because I love studying people's lines and people playing with Spanish and English and Spanglish and creating words. And so any writer that's doing something like that for me is always sort of me está levantando. It's waking me up to the possibilities of language and the aesthetics within their language and combinations of language. And by the way, you see this you see this in many different people who is mixing German and English or whatever, or Yiddish and English or Spanish, etc. So there are a lot of, one of the things that Nepantla Familias will show is that what great promise we have and great talent, and we should not take second place to anybody. We not only do we have a huge, rich vein of American literature within the Latinx community, we should be front and center about it, because we have great writers in our community, young ones, and as well as the traditional older ones.
Well, on that note, let me ask this final one, which is really kind of, you've already been gesturing toward a future. What's next then for you, Sergio?
I mean, as long as I don't die of exhaustion. Well, I would love to write a sequel to Nobody's Pilgrims, and I've already started sketching some things about that. I'm always toying with going. When I write a lot of fiction, I always cross the border back to nonfiction. So I'm writing a series of essays at the moment that I haven't really showed anybody. And for me, it's always just not trying to be comfortable with what I've done. I don't want to repeat what I've done. If I've done something, I want to try a different form. I want to try something new to keep myself alive as an artist, as a writer. So I'm going to do another novel, but it will be experimental in a way that's very different. And so for me, that's sort of what I'm at the most of what I have to tell you about the future. So, and I love working on a lot of projects at the same time.
Wow. So beautiful. Thank you, Sergio, for sharing, gifting your knowledge, your experience, everything, your sort of love of the craft, and your take no shit kind of, opening of doors for everybody. So thank you.
And you know what? Because we deserve it. We have great writers. You're a great writer, and we should not be taking second place anymore. And I think one of the things I remember at Harvard when I showed up, people said, well, you don't act like a minority. And then I kept thinking, like, what does that mean? Does that mean we're supposed to be sheepish and quiet? And in El Paso, I was never the minority. Mexicanos, everyone, the poor, the rich, the in-between, we were all the majority. And so I did not, get that self-hate that too often a lot of us got, because we got our ass kicked, as soon as you got into a white neighborhood or whatever. I was not surrounded by that. So I was surrounded by Mexicanos, the good and the bad and the ugly. And so for me, I think it really changed my attitude. I'm not interested in taking second place. I'm always interested in pushing the envelope forward. And that's what I want to do.
Gracias.